Welcome back to RoxomTV. My name is Walker America. The price of Bitcoin is 80,430 infinitely printable Federal Reserve notes per coin. We're starting a little bit later here today, so I do apologize for my tardiness, but you're going to have me for the next almost 2.5 hours. We've got a great show for you here today. We've got Kyle Olney from the Bitcoin Policy Institute joining us for the upcoming hour here to talk about the Clarity Act, what's happening in DC, what matters for Bitcoiners and what doesn't. And then we'll have Samson Mow, the CEO of Jan3, to talk about Aqua Wallet, nation state Bitcoin adoption, and a whole lot more. So it's a great show we've got here ahead of us for us here today on this Tuesday on RoxomTV. Let's go ahead and get into it. As a first thing, just one can't help but notice that markets appear to be quite in the red today, basically across just about everything. Bitcoin down about 1.5% on the day, still above that $80,000 range. And I don't know about you, but I am still letting my DCA do the work for me. S&P 500 down just a little bit, NASDAQ down a bit more, about 1.5%. We've got Ethereum, down more than Bitcoin, which is always great to see. Tesla down almost 4% in the day. NVIDIA, a modest 0.4%. Strategy down 6.5% on the day. Gold is currently down. Gold is currently up, actually. I lied. It is up 0.45% on the day, with silver down about 1%. Kevin Warsh was also just confirmed. Now, did anything happen today to make markets red? Who can possibly say? No new wars appear to have been started in the meantime. But again, Kevin Warsh was confirmed. That's Trump's pick to lead the Federal Reserve, and he just officially cleared a major hurdle in Washington. The U.S. Senate has now officially confirmed Kevin Warsh as a Federal Reserve governor, moving him one step closer to potentially becoming the next Federal Reserve chair. And markets are paying attention because Warsh is not signaling business as usual. At his confirmation hearing earlier in April, Warsh argued that the Fed has lost credibility with both markets and the public, calling for what he described as a regime change inside the central bank.
One thing that's come up as I've been engaged with different experts is concern about rapid reduction. If you are moving in that speed, that it could generate a number of concerns, including upward pressure on long-term interest rates. So I guess I just wanted to check, do you share that concern? As you are thinking about how to reduce it, do you also understand, though, that there are concerns about rapid reduction and the speed with which you're trying to go down?
Yes, Senator, and that kind of regime change would have to be deliberate, well orchestrated, well choreographed, and well described so that unnecessary upset are not done to financial markets as we go to a policy regime change much more focused on interest rates.
I love the smell of regime change in the morning. The timing is notable. New reports released today show U.S. inflation rose 3.8% year over year in April, coming in above expectations and adding more pressure on the Fed as markets debate whether inflation is becoming structurally embedded again or if it ever stopped being so. Warsh has also stood out from most Fed contenders for his comments on Bitcoin and digital assets. During the hearing, when asked by Senator Cynthia Lummis about digital assets, Warsh said they are already, quote, part of the fabric of the U.S. financial system.
That digital assets should be incorporated into our financial industry so Americans have new investment opportunities and consumer protections.
Senator, digital assets are already part of the fabric of our financial services industry in the United States. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh.
Senator. In past interviews, he's argued Bitcoin can serve as a signal when monetary policy loses discipline, while also drawing a clear line against the Federal Reserve launching a central bank digital currency. The debate is no longer just about interest rates. It's increasingly about trust, credibility, and how the monetary system itself operates. And again, I think that the Fed, boy, they do seem to be quite short on credibility and trust these days. It's maybe new guy, same as the old guy. Who can say? Warsh does appear to be perhaps cut from a little bit of a different cloth than Jerome Powell. Now, I don't envy either Jerome Powell or Kevin Warsh potentially as he becomes the next Federal Reserve chair. Don't envy that position. I would not want to be the head honcho at the cabal of central bankers. But also, it's a great reminder that perhaps that position just shouldn't exist. Perhaps we shouldn't have a cabal of unelected banker bureaucrats setting the price of money, deciding how much money to put into circulation, setting the interest rate. Perhaps we shouldn't have that because it's fundamentally a market distortion. It's point number 5 on Karl Marx's 10 points about what it takes to implement a communist utopia as part of the Communist Manifesto: centralized control and issuance of credit in a central bank. One has to wonder, can we truly have a free market at all if we don't have a free market for money in the first place? Money is the base layer. It's the bedrock of every economic exchange that we have, right? It's money and then energy, perhaps at the base layer, even below that. And if you can't have a free market in the money itself, if the money itself is not a free market, if it is manipulated, if it is centrally controlled, can you ever actually have a free market downstream of that? Or is it all sort of poisoned at the well? Any buckets of water you draw from it are still going to have some of that poison, right? And it's a difficult question, but I think one that people need to think about pretty actively, because a lot of the complaints that you see about from, would-be socialists or communists who are apparently okay with the 100 million people plus death toll that their ideology enacted on the human race in the past century. And by their ideology, I mean them. The communists made that happen. But you see them talk about how all the ills of capitalism, the fact that we've got this rampant inequality and all these things that are all capitalism's fault. And, that's why we need more government control, right? More government control will certainly solve the problem. What they fail to realize, of course, beyond the fact that communism and socialism are fundamentally murderous ideologies that have killed over 100 million people conservatively in the last century, what they fail to realize is that we don't have a true free market, right? Because we don't have a free market for money. We don't have true capitalism, if you want to call it that. I think it's probably better to talk about these in terms of free markets or controlled markets, right? Planned markets. If you don't have a free market for money, you can't really claim, that it's true capitalism. They say real communism's never been tried, but perhaps real capitalism hasn't been tried, at least not recently. Because again, when you have a group of unelected banker bureaucrats who sit at the nexus of all economic interaction because they set the price of money, because they decide in their closed-door meetings that, and we hear about them afterwards from their meeting minutes and from the nice press conferences they deign to give us. It's like watching, the next pope be chosen, right? You see what color smoke's coming up out of the chimney. But it's just funny to me that you see these communists and socialists trying to claim that these problems of inequality are problems of capitalism. It's like, well, no, inequality is a natural state. Inequality is what human beings and all of the natural world has always been. It's been unequal, right? The lion is not equal to the gazelle. Okay, and never will be. But what you see here is natural inequality becoming unnatural. That I'll agree with them with. There are perhaps, greater disparities, or perhaps the disparities are more well observed these days. But why do you see that? Why? They never get to the root problem. And the root problem is that you have centralized control of the money. You have inflation. You have money created out of thin air, right? And who does inflation, who does monetary debasement hurt the most? It doesn't hurt the asset holders. It helps the asset holders. If you hold real estate, if you hold gold, if you hold stocks, if you hold Bitcoin, you are being helped by inflation in terms of the fiat denominated value of whatever you own. But if you don't own assets, you are getting screwed. So what I would like to see from these communists and socialists, if they really care about making things more equal, is to see them campaign for the abolition of the Federal Reserve. But until you do that, I just cannot really take you seriously. Up next, a 309-page bill that could rewrite the rules for digital assets in this country just hit the Senate floor, and the Bitcoin community is paying very close attention. The Senate Banking Committee officially released the new draft of the Digital Asset Market Clarity Act ahead of Thursday's markup vote, giving lawmakers until close of business tomorrow to file amendments. The Clarity Act would let the SEC handle most token issuance and fundraising questions, while the CFTC oversees most of the secondary market trading. The new draft also expands SEC anti-fraud and insider trading authority tied to certain digital asset offerings. One of the biggest remaining fights is over stablecoins. The bill would block platforms from offering bank-style interest, or lack thereof, just for holding payment stablecoins in an account. But it leaves the door open for rewards tied to actual on-chain activity like transactions, liquidity, provisioning, staking, governance participation, loyalty programs, etc. Michael Saylor posted on X that, quote, the act would unlock the next wave of digital capital, digital credit, and digital equity in the US and globally, calling it institutional validation for Bitcoin. There is one unusual addition, the inclusion of the Build Now Act, a housing-related proposal that has nothing to do with crypto or Bitcoin, but could help lawmakers round up broader political support for the package. Bitcoin is never specifically named in the bill, but several sections read like clear wins for Bitcoiners, and we are going to have Kyle Olney from the Bitcoin Policy Institute on with us shortly here to help break some of this down. One of the biggest shows up on page 275, which states that a federal agency may not prohibit, restrict, or otherwise impair a user's ability to self-custody digital assets using a self-hosted wallet. In plain English, your keys, your coins, codified. Another major section is Section 604, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, BRCA, on pages 270 through 273, which says the non-controlling developers and infrastructure providers should not be treated as money transmitters just for building blockchain software, self-custody wallet tools, or node infrastructure. The draft also repeatedly protects Bitcoin infrastructure and open source development. The bill makes it clear that people running nodes, relaying transactions, providing computational work, publishing code, or building wallet software should not automatically be treated as securities issuers. No duh. The bill also formally authorizes banks to custody digital assets, facilitate trading, make digital asset-backed loans, operate nodes, and provide wallet software, essentially handing traditional finance a clear runway into crypto. But the bill also expands anti-money laundering obligations, sanctions enforcement, monitoring, and reporting requirements, including new studies into self-hosted wallets, mixers, DeFi protocols, and offshore stablecoins. So it's a real two-sided deal, a lot of structural protections for Bitcoin and self-custody on one hand, and a meaningful expansion of surveillance authority on the other. Thursday's markup is when we find out which version of the bill actually survives. And again, shortly here in a moment, we'll have Kyle Olney from the Bitcoin Policy Institute coming up. We'll take a quick break before that, but just one note on this, because I've seen a lot of chatter going both ways on the BRCA, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act portion of this, whether or not it actually provides significant enough protections for open source developers, or if it has some language in there that potentially leaves a backdoor for more unjust persecution of open source developers, even when they are not actually custodying user funds, as is the case with the Samurai wallet developers, Bill and Keone, who are currently in federal prison. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back here in just a moment, we will have Kyle Olney from the Bitcoin Policy Institute to help us make sense of everything going on in Washington, D.C. with the Clarity Act. You will not want to miss it, so stay tuned. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back here on RoxomTV.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
Oh, I forgot to mention, dividends on Roxom are paid in Bitcoin. Stretch your income, 11.5% paid in Bitcoin.
Stretch your income to 11.5, get 11.5 in Bitcoin and Roxom. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index is collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
TV. I'm joined now by Kyle OLNEY from the Bitcoin Policy Institute. They are doing Satoshi's work there in Washington, D.C., in the swamp, in the trenches, trying to help regulators be a little bit less antagonistic to Bitcoin. Kyle, how you doing, man?
All right. Great to be with you, Walker. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you back on the show. We've got a couple of things we want to dig into with you, specifically on the Clarity Act, and just, I've seen some different opinions about the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act portion of the Clarity Act, kind of whether or not it's actually, the text is actually good and what Bitcoiners would look for here, or perhaps not so much, something in the middle. Want to have you help us unpack that. First, though, U.S. regulators do have a rule on the books that effectively bans banks from holding Bitcoin, and the window to fight that is closing in mid-June. And the Bitcoin Policy Institute just launched fixbasel.org, a campaign designed to help Americans submit public comments to federal regulators in minutes as the debate over the Basel banking rules intensifies.
Why doesn't your bank touch Bitcoin?
This fight goes far beyond accounting rules. What's really at stake is whether Bitcoin will be allowed to integrate into the traditional banking system at all. The new digital asset clarity draft explicitly opens the door for banks to custody Bitcoin, facilitate purchases and sales, make Bitcoin collateralized loans, and even hold digital assets directly on the balance sheet. But Basel's capital framework could still make that economically impossible in practice. This creates a strange contradiction where regulators approve spot Bitcoin ETFs and encourage institutional adoption while traditional banks still face major disincentives for holding Bitcoin directly themselves. Bitcoin should compete on a level playing field with other reserve assets instead of being isolated under exceptional treatment rules created during an earlier phase of regulatory uncertainty. The June 18th deadline could shape how banks interact with Bitcoin for years to come, influencing custody services, institutional adoption, and America's position in the global economy. I'd like to bring back in Kyle now from BPI. Kyle, I love that you guys are you are fantastic at just spinning up a new, clean new website for everything that needs to get done, making it easy for people to make their voices heard. So is this just the Bank for International Settlements being very crotchety and just hating Bitcoin because they realize it eventually kind of leads to their demise? Or are they just being prudent and trying to keep us all safe?
Well, I think it's the former is the short answer. Yes. Anybody who would be familiar with the Bank of International Settlements would understand that they have been hostile to Bitcoin literally their entire existence, or its entire existence, I should say. And that's kind of their MO, right? I mean, their MO is to defend the, current corrupt and, failing banking system that they are the core representatives of. And ultimately, they're kind of the super regulator at the top of, the pyramid, so to speak, for the traditional finance sector. So, they are the ultimate international, unelected, unaccountable banking elites that you can find. And so, kind of unsurprisingly, they are not friendly to Bitcoin.
Yeah, boy. I think my favorite part of the Bank of International Settlements is, yeah, and I think Augustine Carten stepped down, but just the memes that you could make with his outfits, given how stretched they were over his corpulent frame. Truly, boy, his buttons are working overtime. This is, I digress though.
Load bearing. They're load bearing buttons.
Really impressive. Whoever is, putting those stitches in on his button. I mean, wow, they're doing incredible work there. Structural engineers were consulted to keep his clothes on his frame. Again, I digress. But I think this is great for people to have a really easy way to go in and actually leave comments on this, because this kind of thing too, and again, you don't necessarily have to care about like, oh, I don't care if banks hold Bitcoin. That's fine. Don't do anything then. Do whatever you want. We don't care, right? But it's good to make these options available, because I also think it's good the more actually that Bitcoin gets embedded and gets normalized, the more the Overton window shifts, I think it actually reduces the attack surface on Bitcoin. That's really what I've kind of come around to with a lot of the work that you guys do at BPI is like, you see a lot of the people say, let's not even engage with politicians. We don't need to engage with the banks. We don't need to do any of this. It's like, that's fine. But the more Bitcoin is accepted, the more we have ETFs now, the more companies hold it on their balance sheets, the more people hold it in their retirement accounts without even knowing about it, the more it's treated similar to, treasuries or to gold in terms of its, risk profile, which it very much should be. I think that just lowers and reduces reduces attack vectors and just kind of gets rid of a lot of the attack surface on Bitcoin, because it just becomes too entrenched within the system, even though it's kind of subverting that system, becomes too entrenched for them to make any really unpalatable moves against Bitcoin. Like it kind of defangs the Elizabeth Warrens a little bit. Is that your perspective as well?
Yeah, I think this would be the argument, right? This is a deep swamp sort of fight that we're having on behalf of the Bitcoin network, right? I mean, again, as we said, the Bank of International Settlements and kind of like the Basel framework is sort of intrinsically hostile to Bitcoin for obvious reasons, but that doesn't mean that it's a fight that we shouldn't have, right? We need to, as you said, take the fight to the frontier and really push deeper and deeper into the regulated banking system and make the arguments that need to be made about why Bitcoin is a superior asset and why the kind of regulatory and legal frameworks around the old traditional finance banking system are just they don't make sense in a world where Bitcoin exists, right? Again, the kind of details, I don't want to get too deeply into the specific details here because it'll chew up too much time. But the fact that the capital requirements around holding Bitcoin are 1,200% or in excess of 1,200% effectively means that as a bank regulator, or maybe not as a regulator, but as a bank operator, like the kind of CFO on a managing a bank's balance sheet, this becomes effectively a toxic asset for you. That means that you need to go out and find 10 times the amount of normal collateral that you would need to retain on your balance sheet in order to facilitate lending or any other kind of financial activity around Bitcoin that you would take as collateral in exchange. And so this just is really meant to put full brakes on anybody using Bitcoin in the traditional finance system under the capital rules that implemented in Basel. And so, again, in order to, actually make progress or headway into the traditional finance system and get Bitcoin adopted on a, universal basis in, kind of the real economy, these are the sorts of fights that we need to have, even if they are kind of comical and make not a lot of sense to anybody who would be rationally examining it from the outside.
Well, it is kind of comical too, right? Because you see the traditional banking system calling Bitcoin risky, but it's like you guys are levered to the tits. Like this whole system is fractionally reserved. You went to a 0% reserve requirement all during COVID. They still have the 0% reserve requirement, I believe. That's still the Fed's position, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's like, oh yeah, but Bitcoin, we just print money out of thin air and we leverage it on top of itself over and over and over and over again. But no. this Bitcoin thing with this fixed supply that none of us can control, that is actually the risky thing. I mean, it's like it's like some Twilight Zone thing, right? Like up is down, left is right. Like
Yeah,
fiat
war
is good,
peace.
Bitcoin is bad. It's insane,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
insane.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, again, it's kind of laughable, especially in the world that we are existing in at this present moment, right? I mean, again, I won't get too deeply into it, but the private credit markets right now are looking rather tippy. And there's a lot of cross-collateralization of these private credit funds. And, there's insurance companies that people have exposure to in their, kind of uh, retirement accounts that have private credit exposure that's probably hypothecated collateral all over the place. This is a very complex, very unsecure system that most people in the world rely upon in order to, get their pension payments on a monthly basis in the United States. When you compare that to something like a Bitcoin lending where you're 2 to 1 over collateralized and you get automatically liquidated if you even approach the point where you would no longer have sufficient collateral. I mean, again, these are not serious people, right? Just to put it lightly.
I mean, you're being very kind there to say they're not serious because it really is just almost it's so absurd, and I think that's this like little bit of like this thing all Bitcoiners kind of get to this point where you feel like you're taking crazy pills because you're looking around you at the existing system and at the people who are beneficiaries and operators of that system. And it's built on sand, right? It's built on quicksand. Like it's just constantly sinking. They're trying to patch it as it goes. And yet then they look to Bitcoiners and Bitcoin and say, no, like that's the crazy thing. Like that's the nutty thing, not this giant house of cards that could come tumbling down at any minute if we stop printing so much money, but also the printing of the money is what's going to make it come down, but we can't stop printing it because then it'll come down fast. It's all insane. It's insane. But I'm grateful Bitcoin exists because you do have a way to opt out of that insanity, at least at a personal level. And hey, you know what? If the banks take a little bit longer to start reaping the rewards of Bitcoin, I'm okay with that too. But I would like to see Bitcoin get some equal treatment under the arbitrary rules they set up. At least one can hope for that. But speaking of arbitrary rules that are set up by bureaucrats, so this is really what I want. I'm super excited to dig into with you because you've been one of my kind of go-to sources on the Clarity Act, on everything that's happening, kind of a peek behind the curtain in DC, and also just your perspective on what really matters here. For those who don't know, you were very instrumental and have been vocal about the support of the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, helping push that through from when it was still separate, when it was still the BRCA. Now we have this as part of the Clarity Act. It looks like the Senate Banking Committee, they released the new draft. It's Thursday's the markup vote, so they've got till close of business tomorrow to file amendments. Can you give us sort of the current lay of the land from your perspective? And then there's maybe a couple of points I want us to really dig into a little bit more deeply, but sort of where do we stand right now?
Yeah, so this has been a really complicated bill as it's moved through Congress. We've talked over the months, and there's a lot of inside baseball. But the short version is that the Senate, after many months of deliberation, has finally reached a compromise between I'm going to say the TradFi members of the banking committee, and they finally have now published this markup language that is going to get voted out of committee, hopefully, on Thursday. This language, the primary thing that everybody's been debating for months, but is, been largely irrelevant to the Bitcoin community has been related to stablecoin yields and whether or not, digitally native or, crypto native firms will be able to pass along the, yields that come off of holding treasuries for their stablecoin reserves to end users of those stablecoins. This is an important debate for the US banking system writ whole because it actually is not really at all about the US banking system. It's about whether or not we're going to end up in a world where yuan-backed stablecoins are the dominant payment rail in the outside world for international trade, or whether it's going to be a US dollar stablecoin payment rail that becomes the dominant, international trade sort of medium. This is a meaningful question, but I would say that it's a lot less relevant to whether or not the United States is going to become the crypto capital of the world than whether or not we maintain developer protections so that you can freely develop open source software in the United States. And so the other piece that we have been waiting anxiously to see in this bill, this markup language that was just released last night and will be voted on Thursday, is whether or not the BRCA, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, was intact in the bill because it's been a topic of hot negotiation for the last few months, and I'm happy to report that the BRCA did survive intact for the most part in this markup language that was just released. The one change that they made to the bill was that they added a subsection that clarifies that, and I could actually read it for you here if you're interested, but
Please.
The BRCA applies in all cases except to any person that acts with the specific intent to transfer or on behalf of another person funds that are known by that initial person to be either derived from a criminal offense or intended to be used to promote or support unlawful activity. So on its face, the BRCA would seem to remain intact, and this would seem to be a pretty strong carve out that allows for open source software developers to continue, publishing software, developing wallets, things of this nature. However, there is an open question around interpretation, right? And I think that's where the community is starting to really deeply wrestle today. You see a lot of the lawyers, luminaries like Pierre von Valkenburg at Coin Center, our own Zach Shapiro at BPI. These guys are, they think that this is pretty positive. They think this development is good and that, kind of the statutory reading of this language would protect developers much better than they are protected today, which, I think in general, we could say that that's probably true. But whether or not this loophole, that I would argue it's kind of a loophole for prosecutors because it doesn't explicitly state how you would know that these funds are derived from criminal activity or that, what constitutes awareness of the fact that somebody would be using an open source piece of software that you had previously published for bad intent. This is a question. It's a question because we are already in a universe where, the Samurai and Tornado Cash cases, we have people who have written non-custodial open source software who, for the most part, published it without knowing specific use cases that were nefarious for their software are sitting in jail. And so, both the text of this law would not obviate their prosecutions. Those people still require pardons from, the Trump administration or some official government in order to get out, even if this language were to be passed by Congress. But it also raises the question of, how much prosecutorial discretion exists for future cases to be brought. And I don't think we know that yet. So, in general, this is a positive step forward. But one, this language hasn't been voted on. Two, we don't know what the interpretations are. And three, there are other pieces of concerning language in this bill that hint to expansions of the Bank Secrecy Act. And further crackdowns on mixers, which, in concert with this language, at least leaves concerns on the side of entrepreneurs and people who are developers of software like myself, even if the lawyers feel a little bit better about it today than they did yesterday.
Well, and I think, and thank you for that breakdown because that was super helpful. And this is sort of the key point, I think, is that, okay, BRCA is in there, great. A lot of the text of the BRCA was retained, but this addition that was made that you flagged about the whole and again just to read okay, basically they're saying any person that acts with the specific intent to transfer on behalf of another person funds that are known to, by initial person to be derived from criminal offense, intended to use or promote or support unlawful activity. Because that to me, and I know Zach Shapiro from BPI does great work. He said in response that the BRCA edit looks benign to me. The new carve out requires specific intent to transfer funds and are criminal. This should not capture devs who build privacy neutral tech that gets misused by criminals without evidence of actual intent to aid those criminals. Okay, heard that. Love Zach, does great work. That said, then the other side of this, Keone Rodriguez's wife had posted, Lauren had posted basically, obviously, and she's not a lawyer, but boy, she is, I think, has probably done a lot of studying of legal text because her husband is currently in federal prison because he was writing open source non-custodial software. Again, for those who aren't familiar with the Samurai Wallet case, Bill and Keone were not classified as unlicensed money transmitters by FinCEN, the regulator in charge of that classification. And yet, the prosecutors knew that 6 months before the case started. They prosecuted them anyway underneath the unlicensed money transmitter charge, and then threw on there money laundering, conspiracy to commit money laundering. It ended up being pled down to just unlicensed money transmission and conspiracy to commit money laundering, I believe, were the two charges they had to agree to in the plea. But she had showed that same section from the Clarity Act. But then she said this exact 1960 subsection is now being used to target developers. Every builder and developer knows their tool could be used for nefarious purposes. Under this law, that knowledge alone is enough to send you to prison for years. There is no protection for developers in the Clarity Act while this carve-out remains. And I see her point here very much because, one, she's literally living this right now. She's going through this. Her husband is in prison. And I would encourage President Trump, again, if he happens to be watching this stream, if you want America to be the Bitcoin and crypto capital of the world, you really need to pardon Samurai and these other Bitcoin and crypto prisoners, Roman Storm, Ian Freeman as well. Like, get these guys home to their families. But this is a little bit concerning because you can see that, okay, what constitutes knowing? Because any developer, you know this very well, any developer, just like any, gun manufacturer, you can use that gun for hunting, for self-defense, or you can use it to shoot up a place. Like, this is the problem with tools. People you don't like can use them just like people you like can use them, and especially with open source tech. So, I mean, how concerned are you right now about this? Obviously, not from like a legal perspective per se, but more from the developer perspective of, look, okay, what constitutes you knowing that somebody nefarious is using your tool? Like, how do you even begin? It just seems like it leaves a big opening for prosecution to come in and say, well, look, you tweeted that one time that anyone can use your software, and anyone includes criminals, so therefore you knew. Like, that just seems like a easy jump to make.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that this is my concern as a tool builder, as somebody who's actually been an entrepreneur and built companies and tried to build software and distribute it in the world. This is concerning to me still, right? And it's for the exact issue that you just raised. I mean, in all other places in our society, we do not prosecute tool makers for the nefarious use of their tools, which can be used for any end use purpose. Right. I mean, again, like in the example that you just provided, like, let's break it down, right? Like, the Samurai guys literally went and asked FinCEN whether or not they were qualified to build their tool. They were told that they could, and they're sitting in jail today, right? Like, that seems to just fly in the face of what, a normal reading of the statutes would have provided and what they were literally told by the governing, regulatory body. And if you can't rely on the direct advice of the regulator for whom you would be pulled in front of and charged to protect you, I just don't know what guarantees anybody can have when they're making tools, right? And then, again, on the other side, I mean, if you think about this from the perspective of the carve-outs in this, subsection D that they've added, where, you need to, you need to have knowledge that your tool could be used for nefarious purposes, or that the proceeds came from, a crime. Well, you know, uh, presumably Al-Qaeda terrorists or are coordinating, their schemes using email, right? Are we prosecuting Gmail executives for the use of email coordination tools? Are we prosecuting Microsoft executives for the use of Excel in committing financial fraud? Like clearly we know that people are committing financial fraud throughout our economy using Excel, right? Like so the question I think then boils back down to prosecutorial discretion, right? Like what will a prosecutor decide to bring against a tool maker, right? And then that pushes us back into, sadly, what I would say seems to be a kind of common problem in modern America, which is that there are seemingly different layers of the judicial system based on how much money and how much access you have to, kind of formal institutions of power, right? If you're rich enough, if you're powerful enough, if you, operate in the right industries, you're not gonna get in trouble for being a tool maker. But here, the crime of publishing open source software that is used non-custodially has resulted in, what many of us would say are innocent men sitting behind bars today. And so I think that, my advice, again, if anybody from the administration is listening to this stream, is that, it would be the ultimate Pyrrhic victory to have spent a year and a half wrestling and fighting over, a 100-year update to market rules in the United States, and then, at the, 2-yard line to kneecap, an entire industry of software developers who might say, well, you know what, this is still too questionable for me, and I would rather exit and go to Hong Kong or Singapore or the UAE, wherever you name your jurisdiction, where I can have certainty that I'm not going to get prosecuted for publishing an open source tool that might be used for nefarious reasons. Because sure, maybe we can rely on Todd Blanche at his word, and the Trump administration that this is their updated interpretation, and as long as you don't willfully collude with bad actors or nefarious funds, that you won't be prosecuted. But what's to prevent a Democratic DOJ that would seem to be coming after this next election from prosecuting anybody in this community, especially based on the precedent that's already been set in the Samurai and the Tornado Cash cases by Todd Blanche and this administration? So yes, the short story is that the lawyers are feeling better today about what protections presumably exist, but they are part of the priesthood that has access to the courts, and they're not paying for their own time in the way that entrepreneurs and software developers need to or are forced to. And so wearing my software developer hat and kind of representing the builder community, I would say that this is a modest step forward, but it does not address fully my concerns.
I'm right there with you, and wearing my podcaster hat, because podcasters are really, we are the shield so that open source developers may be the tip of the spear of freedom. That's how I like to look at it. We can provide some cover, hopefully, for the people doing the incredible work out there of actually building these freedom tech, privacy tech tools that we all need very much right now and guaranteed will need more in the future. But you hit on something that I think is really the most infuriating part for me, which is just this double standard. You brought up email and or Excel, any of these things, and these are great examples too. But we have even more like kind of extreme examples of this. You look at J.P. Morgan Chase, who pled out and settled, paying hundreds of millions of dollars because they were laundering Jeffrey Epstein's money. not only were they had custody of it, unlike Bill and Keone, who never had custody of anyone's funds in Samurai Wallet, never custodied. FinCEN agreed. But JP Morgan Chase literally was holding his money from. That's how banks work, right? That's the whole thing about banks. And they literally paid hundreds of millions, and they pay hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in fines all the time as a cost of doing business. But does anyone ever end up in jail? Nope. You laundered money for a pedophile sex trafficker, and nobody went to jail.
How is that possible? More than $1 billion, too.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just like $100,000. It was more than $1 billion that they moved through JP Morgan.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They filed 1,000 suspicious activity reports, none of which were followed up on by the regulator. So, I didn't mean to derail you from your point there, but I think it's very important that people understand that, like, this is the presumptive reason that they want to use the Bank Secrecy Act and, intrude into, squashing mixers, eliminating privacy software, right? Like, all of these things are supposedly to protect, the broad public and to, uphold the laws such as they exist. But in cases like the one that you described, where 1,000+ suspicious activity reports were filed by internal bank employees, it was escalated to the head of compliance. They buried it for years. I think almost a decade is how long they let this continue from the time that it was originally flagged. And $1 billion moved through the bank. And there were literally no consequences until it became so public and so painful for them that they had to settle it. Like, this clearly, if you're an objective observer, it forces you to ask serious questions about whether there are two tiers of justice or many tiers of justice in this country that exist for some and not others.
It is truly insane. It's like, oh, if you have the hundreds of millions or billions to pay the fines, and you have the massive teams of super high hourly rate lawyers on call at all times and in-house, yeah, nobody goes to jail, right? But and to your point, that's the problem. The problem is that it is literally, I guess, pay to play or pay to stay out of prison. And if you've got the money and you've got the lawyers, you will never see a day of prison. But when you're the little guy who's writing open source freedom tech, and now Keone and Bill are both saddled with massive multi-million-dollar legal bills. For anyone that's interested, if you go to Keone's profile on X, it's just at KEONNE. He posted an address, a Bitcoin address that you can donate to, because his family is saddled with massive legal fees from fighting this ridiculous persecution. I won't even call it a prosecution. It was a persecution of him and Bill. And so if you're able and you want to donate, you can do that. Not force anyone to. You can always just go share the post. That's free, right? But this is the problem here, is that you've got this system where those that are the entrenched power structures that are closest, the cantillionaires, the ones closest to the money printer, quite literally in this case with the big banks, they just are above the law, essentially. They get bailed out when they screw up, and when they do launder money for criminals knowingly, nobody goes to jail. There's nobody even gets fired, I'm sure. I don't know if there were even any firings that came of that, which is just insane. I mean, maybe they fire a couple guys like lower down in the totem pole, but it's none of the guys up at the top. It's not Jamie Dimon saying, mea culpa, I better step down. Like, we were laundering money for a sex trafficking pedophile. Like, no. It's business as usual. Hey, what are you going to do? It's banking, right? And this is the insane part to me. This is the part that I think should make any freedom-loving and justice-loving American honestly pissed off and a little bit sick to your stomach, because how can you this is not justice, it's a perversion of justice when you have guys that are just writing incredible software. And the maddening part, Kyle, is FinCEN said, you guys are not money transmitters. And they went after him anyway, which brings me back to the current language in the BRCA portion of the Clarity Act, where it's like, okay, sure, this says that if they don't know about it, then it's okay. Well, Keone and Bill didn't. They just made a couple of, perhaps you could say, off-color tweets, jokingly like, hey, welcome to the new, or welcome Russian oligarchs. Like, that's what was cited. That's obviously like a joke, right? Like, they weren't actually in contact with Russian oligarchs. They don't actually know if Russian oligarchs are using it, but that's what the prosecutors used as one of the points in their indictment to say you guys were conspiring to commit money laundering. So I just I'm with Keone's wife on this, Lauren, that this really seems like it sort of and with you, Kyle, that this kind of seems like it leaves the door not even cracked, but sort of wide open for this same sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, prosecutorial malice, just perversion of the law. I don't know what you want to call it, but it seems like it gives them a pretty big opening. And to me, it's frankly quite concerning. Do you think there's a chance of this language changing during this markup period? Or is this one of those things that's so much of a footnote already that maybe everyone's focused on stable coins, Like, is anybody out there on, in terms of actual policymakers, is anyone out there who you think is going to go to fight for this part?
Yeah, well, I I think that this is actually maybe the most, kind of critical thing for people to be aware of here. So just because this text has been released, and obviously that's what we're debating at this moment, this is still not law, and they still have an opportunity. So I think members of the banking committee have the opportunity until the end of business today to submit their proposed changes to this language. So this isn't even necessarily the final language that's going to be voted on Thursday. Like, there may still be updates that are made between here and then. And then it's also important to remember that voting it out of the banking committee is not the same as passing it through the whole Senate. So this then needs to go to the floor, at which point all members of the Senate will have an opportunity to try to make amendments or change the language. And only then, once the entire Senate has voted, which, as a reminder, will require 60 votes, in order to get there, which means that there need to be Democratic lawmakers or senators who join in order to get this over the line and actually get the Clarity Act enacted into law. Only then will we have the final shape and structure of the actual, bill language, right? So we are not out of the woods yet, even from, what it is that we're just discussing here. To address your specific question about this, kind of clause, there's been a lot of pushback, and the reason that we've been sort of anxiously awaiting this, draft text was because there's an organization, we don't know exactly how many, but there are a large number of state attorneys general who are pushing for the addition of this, what we're calling the 1960 carve out, where they can charge, based on the, malintent, right, or the knowledge that this is, kind of nefarious funds. And it's unclear at this stage whether the language as it's been inserted is even sufficient to mollify the concerns of the state attorneys general and the kind of Democratic members of the Senate who have been pushing on this front. So we hope that this is, the compromise that was reached in order to get those more law and order Democrats to see this as acceptable to move forward and kind of have a chance of reaching a bipartisan, kind of 60 vote threshold. But that's unclear at this point. It's very possible that they could still come in and say, this is not sufficient. And we want more protections for prosecutors and the legal system, and obviously less protections for developers in that case. But it's unclear. It's unclear whether that's going to continue to be a thrust or not. And then there's also, it's worth mentioning, just to cover everything that's contentious about this bill. While we're talking about it, it's also unclear whether the banking, TradFi is going to accept the compromise that was made on stablecoin yields or not. They literally fired out a Mother's Day red alert bulletin to all of their member banks saying, hey, it's time to mobilize and push back. This is going to, kind of kill our industry and we need everybody in the fight. Unclear how, motivated those players are going to be because, talk from the White House is, that they felt that they are kind of late to the game and were not properly engaged and haven't really been good faith actors, if you take the, kind of tweets from Patrick Witt at face value. And then another thing that's a big unresolved question mark for literally everybody on all sides at this point is the ethics concerns related to the Trump family crypto projects and whether or not strong ethics language is going to get included in a final bill here, which may make it very challenging for either Republicans to vote for in the event that that language is included, because then they would be needing to buck their own president and kind of deal with the internal politics of the party in that regard. Or on the reverse side, if the ethics language is not included or it's not strong enough, that may just be a non-starter for any Democrats to vote in favor of this bill, in which case the bill can't move forward. So there are a number of still potentially complicating issues that need to be resolved in this bill before it really becomes law. I'm conscious of the fact that I've been talking for a while, but the last thing I want to say on this point is just
Keep
that,
on going.
yeah, that, if you're a Bitcoiner and you're listening to this and you are concerned about this language, there's still an opportunity to have an impact and like make sure that your voice is heard and that we do end up with the best language that we can get. So I would strongly encourage anybody listening to this who, like me or, like Keone's wife or, any of the other builders out there who are concerned that this, loophole that they've inserted, the subsection D, related to the BRCA, is a loophole large enough to drive a truck through. I would encourage you to pick up the phone and make sure that your senator understands that, because this is, the best shot on goal that we've had for developer protections. That still is the truth. Like, I mean, if we can get a good bill, we want a good bill, and we want these protections because it would stop many of the prosecutions, like Samurai and Tornado Cash. It doesn't prohibit all of them, but it would certainly exclude a large class of them. If we can get that across the line, we should. And so, it is important for Bitcoiners to mobilize, be activated, and, kind of continue to fight the good fight on this all the way up until it actually gets enacted into law.
So, okay, a couple of pieces I want to pull on there, but as you were talking about the state's attorneys generals, one thing that came to mind there, because I think that's an interesting piece of information, right? That they're actively pushing for this carve out, but doesn't the fact that they're pushing for this carve out in the first place kind of indicate that this carve out will be used as a loophole to still prosecute developers? Like, doesn't just the existence or the fact that they want to do that, doesn't that pretty much let us know why they want to do that and what that will be used for? Like, that just seems like another kind of nail in the coffin of like, yep, they want this in there because they want something, they want a loophole they can pull on and use it to screw over open source devs. Like, or is there some other nuance there for why they would want this?
No, I mean, I think the reasoning's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, they want to continue to be able to have means to charge, potential, litigants with things that they think they should be charged with, right? So I do think that this should, among other things, raise our alarm bells in the builder community and in the developer community about like, well, why is this needed? I think to steelman the opposite case, it would be that, adding this subsection makes clear the reason that they would charge somebody, right? And so, their example here is like, well, if you're not doing anything nefarious, you have nothing to worry about, of course. Right. Well, and this is a very, it probably sounds a very
Why do
similar
you need
argument
privacy
to
if you have nothing to hide, right?
exactly.
Like, come
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that this is something that should concern us all. And frankly, again, I think, I'm saying this more from a personal perspective rather than, in my professional association with BPI. But I mean, again, I would say that this is an example of where the bias in America toward over legislating and over regulating and making sure that there's just an endless number of laws on the books that anybody could be picked off the street and charged for breaking a law. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this, like you could find the average person walking on the street and charge them with 6 crimes in a day. Because that's how over legislated and over regulated we are in American society these days. Like it would almost seem that this is, the intent or the objective, and again, that's like a meta problem. That's not necessarily a Bitcoin specific problem. That's a social culture of America where we find ourselves in the year 2026 problem. And I think it's a real problem, and I think it's something that we need to think seriously about as citizens and voters and people who are engaged in the day-to-day effort of making democracy work in this country, right? Do we want to live in a country where it is so challenging to navigate your legal compliance that the disagreement among lawyers about whether or not you have a right or not needs to be adjudicated for thousands of dollars before you can even know whether you're breaking a law? Right? Like I don't think that that's very freedom oriented. I don't think that that is in the best interests of the average American, and I certainly don't think that it's helping us, build a better society of high trust and economic, sort of prosperity. So yeah, but those again, my personal feelings about these things, may be a little bit different than others.
No, I'm with you on this, and to me, again, the part that's kind of just absurd about this is the line for what could potentially be construed as knowledge of criminal activities. Like if it was really about stopping criminals from laundering money, right? Well, then they would be cracked. They would have provisions in this bill that are cracking down super harshly and imposing prison sentences on everyone who works at a big bank if they launder money knowingly or unknowingly, right? But they don't, right? No one from the big banks is going to go to jail. Furthermore, the fact that we know that this it kind of doesn't even matter what the rules are, because the sovereign district of New York can just decide to go after open source developers regardless, ignore the rules that are on the books, and prosecute anyway. It's like, okay, well, then there's not a whole lot of faith there that they're going to suddenly become good actors, right? And suddenly, decide that, actually, maybe we should live up to the whole justice thing. And finally, just this idea that, okay, well, what if you really wanted to do what you say you want to do? If you really want to we just really want to make sure that you guys aren't knowingly, processing criminal funds. Well, then you would think you would make it really explicit in there to say, like, I don't know, has communication with, or somehow like that you're actually engaging with the criminals, versus the simple idea that, well, I know that it's technically possible for, like, anyone can use my tool. It's open source software. So of course it's technically possible that somebody can use it to launder money. And probably statistically, there's somebody laundering money in it right now. Like, does that get you a prison sentence then? Because that's kind of what it feels like. It kind of feels like that's all it's going to take. That we know the Southern Sovereign District of New York really doesn't care about what FinCEN says, or really what anyone says. I guess somebody should really rein them in a bit, and they're going to go after people. And so then it just becomes a question of, well, okay, like, what are we doing here, guys? What are we doing? And what kind of country? To your point, I think this was your larger point here. Is like, what kind of country do we want to live in? We want to live in one where, even when there are laws on the books and rules in the books protecting people from unjust prosecution, that you still get prosecuted and persecuted anyway, just because you're working in an industry that is viewed as somehow, distasteful or something like that. Like, it's just insane to me, Kyle. And I don't know. That's not a quick fix, though, is the problem. That's a long fix, I think. I wish it was a quick fix, but I think it takes a lot of it. And I guess sadly, just like a lot of people just don't care about this. Like the average person just trying to get through their day, right? Can't blame them. Can't blame them one bit. But even of the people that probably should care, I think a lot of people will probably ignore this. I encourage people not to. I encourage them to pay attention. But I don't know. It's don't mean to black pill there, but it's like sometimes you're just like, well, fuck.
Yeah. Well, it's, we are inheritors of an interesting time in American history, right? And as challenging as it can be to navigate the black pills and try to maintain a sense of optimism about the future, like, I actually think that this is the sort of thing that should be a rallying call to our generation, and it should be the sort of thing that lights our fire right? And the fire in our bellies and like makes us angry and get up and go and fight for these things and actually get engaged in the political process in a way that I think our parents and their parents' generations, frankly, just kind of didn't and have largely taken for granted. As you mentioned, over the last 40 years or so, we've just constantly eroded civil liberties and kind of rights that were enumerated by the founding generation in this country, and that has to stop at some point. At some point, we have to wake up as a people, as a generation, and say enough is enough. Like we've slid too far from our core values and kind of the social contract. To your point, Peter van Valkenburg actually had a really great piece a couple months ago about, when did we become so scared as a people, right? Like we were the society that settled the frontier of the world, frankly. Like, I mean, literally, we sailed across the ocean not knowing what the hell was on the other side. And like, we went into the great unknown and settled the wild frontier and did battle with, all manner of, natural and man-made phenomena that were required taming in order for, the forces of freedom and liberty and, an ideology built around freedom and liberty to prevail on the North American continent. And, for us to have found ourselves in the year 2026 so afraid that somebody might do something that's, semi-dangerous to others, and that this is, such a horror that we might stop society cold in its tracks and prevent progress from moving forward because there might be some costs associated, with that forward progress. I mean, can you imagine us just scrubbing the entire space shuttle program when, one shuttle burned up on the pad, and saying, nope, we're not going to space anymore. Like a couple people, that was too much, that was too high a cost, we can't bear this. No, right? That's not the American character. That's not who we are as people, right? Like we are hard scrabble, tough it out, freedom loving people. Like, we understand that there is risk and, difficulty on the frontier. And I think that we need to, remind ourselves of that more often, and we need to fight for these things that are important in our, kind of cultural heritage. So, do I still have you, Walker? Oh no. Okay.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index is collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed two brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Bitcoin! Come on, little buddy! Bitcoin! I need you! Don't go!
RoxomTV, apologies for the technical difficulties. Apparently, the powers that be just did not like how spicy things were getting with me and Kyle. Kyle, maybe I'll give you a chance here to kind of to finish up your thought, and we're reaching the end of our time with you, sadly. So just maybe any final thoughts as well on top of that. I'm sorry we had to slow your roll right in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's okay. I was just I was building up too much momentum. We needed the to get rugged there. So, but yeah, the point that I was making was basically just that, I think our generation is uniquely suited to the challenge of pushing back against this erosion in civil liberties and just common sense in what the American character and the American spirit are supposed to be. And I think as Bitcoiners, we all know that Bitcoin is the kind of digital instantiation of American values into cyberspace, and that is incredibly empowering if we can maintain those rights and values in kind of the legal framework that the United States is adopting. And so again, to kind of like wrap things up in a bow here, as we approach the hour, I would just strongly encourage everybody listening to this that nothing is done yet as it relates to clarity and developer protections. You pick up the phone, make sure that your senators understand how important open source developer protections are to you and how critical they are to the prosperity of the American economy and our future in this country. And get engaged in this fight and make sure that we can anchor the most sort of pro-Bitcoin, pro-American values sort of architecture that we can into the law with this process that we're going through around the Clarity Act, because this is the best shot on goal that we've had in 17 years since Bitcoin started. And despite its many, sort of blemishes and, kind of the natural reality of the sausage making, we still have an opportunity to get a big win here if all of the cyber hornets and the cypherpunks and, the people who are deep believers in Bitcoin make their voices heard and make sure that Congress is aware that we will not be told to sit quietly and accept a dual class of citizenship in the United States of America in the year 2026.
Here, I say amen to that. And Kyle, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you breaking this stuff down for us. Your perspective is really valuable on this, and appreciate all the work that you guys do at BPI. I know it is not easy from my one day that I spent talking to staffers and lawmakers on the Hill. My God, I felt like I aged a decade in that day alone. So I really appreciate that you guys are out there fighting the good fight, advocating for Bitcoin and Bitcoiners and Bitcoin developers, because boy, it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. And I sure as heck am glad that you guys are out there doing it for us right now. So thank you, and thank the whole team at BPI.
Well, thank you for having us, and we appreciate you, with everything that you do, bringing, this information to the rest of the world. And yeah, we'll be out there fighting the fight in the swamp in DC on behalf of cyber hornets everywhere. So, we love you guys. Keep giving us energy. Go check out fixbasel.org on the way out, and then call your senator. Make sure that they know open source developer protections are critical.
Amen. It doesn't take long, guys. And when they get inundated with calls, it actually can help them move the needle. And they know their constituents actually care about something for once. So never underestimate the power of a bunch of very motivated plebs to change things a little bit. So yeah. And go to billandkeone.org as well.
Yes.
Sign that petition. Stay following. Keep that case, the Samurai case, in the news. Keep it in the keep it within the discussion because those guys need to be brought home. So Kyle Olney from Bitcoin Policy Institute, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. And guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Samson Mow, the CEO of Jan3. We're going to be talking Aqua Wallet, all the other great stuff they're doing over there at Jan3 in terms of driving nation state adoption. Always great to hear from Samson. I'm looking forward to it. I know you guys are too. So stay tuned. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back here on RoxomTV in just a moment.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
How about Stretch preferred stock on Roxom? Receive 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
11.5% paid in Bitcoin? How is that possible?
It's real. Stretch dividends on Roxom gives 11.5% monthly cash dividends paid in Bitcoin.
Dang! I want everyone pitching Roxom to your clients. Corporate traders, asset managers, old, young, Stretch on Roxom is for everyone.
Now that's a birthday gift. 11.5% in Bitcoin.
We are in heaven at 11.5. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Oh, I forgot to mention, dividends on Roxom are paid in Bitcoin. Stretch your income, 11.5% paid in Bitcoin.
Stretch your income to 11.5, get 11.5 in Bitcoin and Roxom. 11.5%. 11.5%.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Welcome back to RoxomTV. We're going to be joined by Samson Mow in just a moment here. But before we do, billionaire Ray Dalio says Bitcoin is failing to become the safe haven many expected during recent market volatility, pointing to Bitcoin's correlation with tech stocks, its relatively small market size, and concerns over privacy and surveillance. Take a look.
In the same period that gold's climbed 80% since we last talked, Bitcoin's down 25%. What's your view on what's happened with Bitcoin and why that hasn't played the role that many thought it was going to play, which is the safe haven asset?
There's an important differentiating characteristics of Bitcoin. Bitcoin does not have privacy. Any transactions can be monitored and then indirectly perhaps controlled. Central banks are not going to want to buy Bitcoin and being able to hold it. So it's not just individuals, it's institutions and so on, but most, and central banks. There has been some question or thoughts of the development of, new technologies like quantum computing and so on. Can there be issues regarding that? And then there's, who owns it and what are the other exposures that they have in their portfolio. It tends to have a pretty high correlation with the tech stocks. So from an ownership, just the supply demand is affected by if somebody gets squeezed in one thing, they sell something, whatever else they have.
Well, now Dalio isn't fully anti-Bitcoin. The Bridgewater founder has previously disclosed owning BTC and has recommended small portfolio allocations to both gold and Bitcoin as hedges against fiat debasement and rising sovereign debt. Bitcoin bulls, however, were not interested in that framing. Michael Saylor responded that, quote, gold is analog capital, Bitcoin is digital capital, transparency is a feature, not a bug. And our special guest today, Samson Mow, put it more bluntly, gold was practice, Bitcoin is the real thing. I'd like to welcome Samson now. Samson, how are you doing? And boy, I got to say, you hear somebody like Ray Dalio, who I don't know about you, but like me personally, I used to look at this guy as a bit of like an oracle, really knew what he was talking about. Then you hear him talk about Bitcoin in this way, just like the most kind of surface level tropes. I mean, what does this say to you at this point in the year 2026?
Well, people that think Bitcoin has no privacy and it's a tech stock, we call them poor. So that's kind of the underlying current here. But, I used to wonder when I was a kid, why do we get old? Why do we die? And questions like that. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of realized it's sort of an evolutionary defense mechanism that, once you reach a certain age, you cannot adapt, you cannot learn new things, you cannot understand new concepts. And I think Dalio is kind of the emblem of that he's from a past time, was very successful, but he just cannot get past his own biases and his own thinking to understand this new technology, which is Bitcoin. And the best he can do is compare it to gold. But if you really wanted to compare Bitcoin to gold, then you should do a fair comparison, right? So he's saying that Bitcoin lacks privacy. And that is true if you're buying Bitcoin from an exchange. So let's just take the analogy that Bitcoin is gold. You have a vein of gold, I don't know, pick some place, Arizona, some California, where there's a gold rush. And you have some gold miners that are mining the gold, and they set up a little store next to the river. And you go to them and you buy the gold from them. And in the process of buying the gold, you give them all your information. You tell them your address, your phone number, your photo ID. You give that to them too. You tell them, your age, height, weight, and everything. And then you expect that you have privacy. And that's just not the way it works. But if you went and you mined the gold or you found the gold yourself, then nobody knows that. So I just don't understand why it's so difficult to understand this, or they're just blindly repeating things that they've heard online somewhere. The other thing he said was people can stop you from transacting it. And I think he's mixing up a few things there. You can have addresses that are blacklisted, but I don't think any Bitcoin that has been blacklisted or any Bitcoin that has been theoretically denied movement has ever been stopped movement, because someone just makes that transaction and some miner somewhere, some BitAxe will just mine it and it'll move. and that's it. So in theory, yes. In practice, no. And I think that's the biggest problem with a lot of these critics of Bitcoin. They lack the fundamental understanding of how Bitcoin works, how the network works.
And this is the, I think, almost, I don't know if it's humorous or frustrating, a little bit of both, but you would just think, given the plethora of information out there now, that you wouldn't keep hearing these same old tropes or new tropes, but equally kind of surface level in their understanding of Bitcoin, repeated ad nauseum over and over, but we still do. And it's, you kind of, it makes you realize, oh, well, if somebody like Ray Dalio still just doesn't get it at that level like that, and not even going a layer deeper, like he's not even getting some of these things, as you mentioned, that the transactional part, like, well, it can be controlled. It's like, well, no, it can't. Yes, it is transparent, but again, as Saylor said, that is a feature, not a bug. If you want to use it privately, you also can. There are many different ways to be able to do that, whether on the base chain or on alternate layers. But it just seems like, is this just a symptom of how early we still are? That you still have people that are viewed as these, these titans, right? The Ray Dalio. I mean, come on, it's Ray Dalio. That even he is still so far removed from even like a casual pleb Bitcoiner's understanding of some of these basic things. Is that just a symptom of still being really early, despite all the adoption we do see?
Yes, definitely. We are very early, and all indicators show that we are still early. Even if you watch that clip, they're talking about, gold outperformed Bitcoin in the same time period in the last, several months. And it just shows that not only are we early, but everybody is very high time preference. There's nobody that's really low time preference out there other than the plebs, like they're looking at these short time frames and making these comparisons and making decisions based on these comparisons. But I think the fundamental issue is two things. They're just watching other influencer podcasts. Like I hear a lot of Chamath in what Dalio is saying. He's watching Chamath, like they're just recycling the same content because they're just going on podcasts and then listening to what the other guy says and then they're repeating it. And unfortunately, it's untrue. But the other underlying symptom, as I said, is they're just unable to understand Bitcoin. And there's another good example of this cognitive block. So there's this class of math problems called the Erdős problems, and they've been unsolved for 60 years. And all of a sudden, some kids with AI and GPTs, they're coming along and solving these problems. And there was one mathematician that theorized what what happened? Like, is AI that good? And his theory was that it's just that human mathematicians always took a wrong turn at the very start of solving the problem. And then they just got the wrong answer at the end. So I think it's very similar for Bitcoin. They're just taking the wrong turn at the very beginning and they're unable to solve it. But again, like this is why, the older generation has to leave because it's the younger generation that can understand it and figure it out and move on.
It's a really great analogy too, in terms of starting. If you're starting from the wrong place, you're not going to be able to get to that solution. If all of your priors are already leading you in a direction that will never lead you to the truth, like you're just not going to make it there. And I'm, I agree with you too. It's what's that old saying, science advances one funeral at a time, something like that. I think maybe perhaps money the same way, technology the same way. And speaking of technology, you guys at Jan3, you do a lot of stuff. Obviously, nation state adoption and the focus on that from a consulting perspective was the kind of core mission, but you guys have really expanded into a lot of stuff. Aqua Wallet, I'm in no way affiliated. I do love Aqua Wallet though, so this is just me as a satisfied customer of Aqua Wallet. Fantastic wallet, really nice that you've got layer 1, layer 2. You've also got USDT. And it's using Liquid as well, which for those who have never tried it, like Liquid is great. I don't know why more people don't use it. It's nice that I can do all that in one app. Tell me about what else you guys are working on to sort of drive, while everybody, while the Ray Dalios of the world think that Bitcoin is still just a digital pet rock. You guys are actively building infrastructure around this and also talking to people all over the world about why Bitcoin matters. So tell me, what are you guys working on? Then maybe we can get into a little bit of kind of what you're seeing at a more macro level from your place at Gen3.
Sure. I think you had Prince Philip on last week, and he alluded to this, but we launched Agentic Aqua, which is an agentic version of the Aqua wallet that everyone loves. So it's the Liquid wallet, Lightning support, and stablecoins all in one. but now packaged up for AI agents. And it's a good segue because it's directly related to what we're talking about, that the older generation can't seem to understand it. And I'm curious if they really understand the impact that AI will have. But from my perspective, AI changes everything, like how you will transact, your ability to have your agents transact, or even just free flowing agents' ability to transact. And I think Bitcoin and these and stable coins are definitely a part of that mix there, where an agent cannot really get a credit card or a bank account, but they can create an Aqua wallet, because now we built this toolkit called Agentic Aqua. So your agent can now get Bitcoin, receive Lightning payments, swap to stable coins very soon, and make these transactions all by itself. So it's a whole new ball game out there where, people have said it before, but the expectation is that there will be billions, if not trillions, of AI agents transacting. So there will be more transaction volume coming from these autonomous workers that are coming from humans. So you have to plan for that future. And I think there's a lot to play around with, a lot to discover. So yesterday we are talking on a call and we're discussing like how would you get a Jan3 account, which is a Jan3 account is a account in Aqua that will link you to other services that you want to bind, like a card, debit card, Visa card, or potentially other things too. And right now we have a CAPTCHA to make you go through as a human to make sure you're not a bot. But the world has changed, so now we do want bots to pass the CAPTCHA to create an account to bind it to other services. So we're just talking about just letting the AI pay for it, right? So the point of the CAPTCHA is to block spam, so you don't get DDoSed. But if they're paying for it, then you go back to kind of the hash cash argument. It's just proof of work, energy, money, and then you let them through. So we're planning to probably let AI agents create the Jan3 account. So instead of seeing a CAPTCHA, they will just pay a little bit of sats and get their Jan3 account and then bind it to other services. So money is now your proof of existence. It doesn't matter if you're human or bot.
Okay, so that's fascinating in terms of just that shift, because that is a really fundamental paradigm shift, going from, look, we want to make sure we keep out anything that's automated because we don't want to get DDoSed, right? To, well, hold on, we still want that, we still want to keep, we don't want to get DDoSed, but at the same time, a lot of these automated things are now things we want to have. We want to have these agents utilizing our systems. We want to have these personas in there. And flipping that switch, it then becomes, as you're talking about this, it becomes so very clear that it's like, well, what else could they use? What else could they use? And I mean, do you think we're entering this era where the sort of, pay to play, the hash cash argument, the, micropayments, whatever it might be, for these AI agents and perhaps for, also for us humans, becomes much more of the standard versus, helping Google identify traffic lights or whatever it might be? Like, does it start to just become this experience where you almost need to have a monetary premium attached to it, because perhaps there's also new and inventive ways to get around those things even as a bot? So maybe you really do need to at least add some sort of costliness to it in order to ensure that you're not going to get spammed, that you're not going to get DDoSed. Is that kind of where you see this heading? And I guess how fast, is that a gradually then suddenly thing, or are we already in the suddenly part?
Well, suddenly is getting more sudden every day, which is, the pace at which everything is developing, the pace of AI development, it's just so rapid. We're barely able to keep up. But I think definitely it's going to happen sooner than later. And you're going to see that hash cash-like mechanism. Adam Back was right to think about that. And we're coming full circle back to the origin there. And even with CAPTCHAs, AIs can bypass them easily. I've seen a number of videos where it's like telling the AI agent, like, pretend you're human and pass the CAPTCHA, and it does it. So they're not even that effective anymore. And what is effective is energy and money. So I think eventually, probably not even that far away, maybe within the year, you're just going to see all these Bitcoin Lightning CAPTCHAs that just want some sats to prove you exist and you're not an attack. And the old CAPTCHA system will just disappear with that. And I just can't see any company that is really serious about agentic commerce leaving something so archaic in place. They're going to have a Bitcoin system that just waves you through if you pay the toll.
I mean, it makes sense. Have you guys, is that something, without disclosing anything, material and non-public, is that something you guys have thought about providing at kind of like a service layer? Because obviously, CAPTCHA is something that is that's a service, right? Is that something that you guys, I know you're focused on a lot of things, so I wasn't sure if that was also in your realm of focus as part of the things that you guys are providing as such a, you guys are a very forward-looking company. So are you guys thinking about that at all, or other things in that realm of kind of preparing companies or nation states for dealing with what is coming and what is already here?
Yeah, so the CAPTCHA thing, I would say maybe we'll first implement it in Agentic Aqua, but it is a big barrier for like a normal website. I don't know if they'll understand it at that time, right? Because you're gonna have to get Walker, you're gonna have to whip out your phone and pay some sats, or there will be some browser extension that does it for you automatically. We'll have to figure it out, but the traditional way might be a bit too high friction for a lot of companies, and they don't really want to charge people, and they don't understand that you can just charge a few sats. So it's an uphill battle. So I think the way to get through it is to first use it ourselves, test it out, and then we can productize it and roll it out. But on that note, regarding nation states, we're seeing that similar kind of inertia. They just don't really understand the benefit of Bitcoin. And it reinforces that saying, we're still so early that they don't really understand it. And you compound that with the fact that when the price is down, they are even less interested. So, a lot of these memes are just reality. The two booths where it's like, Bitcoin at 126, everyone's lining up there. Bitcoin at 60, 65, it's empty. So it's the exact same thing playing out, but with higher stakes at the nation state level. But I believe it needs to be a key part of discussion soon, because when we reach that inflection point where Bitcoin starts to overtake gold, I think every country should be prepared, because there's going to be a massive exodus of capital into this new thing, and nobody really knows how to do it at that point. When it's time to do it, it's almost too late to learn about how to do it.
Yeah, you want to be prepared in advance, that's for sure. Because again, the suddenly part is very sudden. I'm curious too, at the nation state level, you mentioned there is still a lot of friction, obviously, and we know that governments are not typically known as the first movers, right, as the early adopters of things, unless it's perhaps new weapons technology. But that's a different story. But we have seen instances of smaller nations. We have El Salvador, very very famously, right, who's been ahead of the curve. You've also got the instance of the Kingdom of Bhutan, which, and yes, they've been, people were like, oh, they're selling their Bitcoin. It's like, well, yeah, they're selling Bitcoin to pay for things to make their citizens' lives better. Like if only more governments would do that, that'd be fantastic. But we do see these instances of some governments being much more ahead of this curve, being those early adopters. It seems it's obviously smaller nations that are perhaps a bit more nimble. You've got a different sort of governance structure there that allows for that. But I am curious if you think, as we move into the coming few years here, obviously there's a lot of tensions around sanctions ongoing, have been for a while. I mean, when the start of the Ukraine war, obviously that was very big news. Russia getting cut off from the U.S. U.S. fiat banking system. We're going to see more and more of that. Tensions don't seem to be de-escalating anytime soon with any conflict around anywhere. So I'm just curious if you think that sort of let's say the geopolitical climate is currently orchestrated as such where it is actually going to perhaps accelerate that nation state adoption out of necessity, because even big players in the G7 are going to realize, okay, maybe we need to have another way to move money around in case we get cut off by the U.S. Or maybe the U.S. is, obviously there's been the strategic Bitcoin reserve kind of enacted, but as an executive order, there's attempts to codify it as well. Hasn't moved forward too fast yet, but where do you think we go from here in the next couple of years, let's say, just in terms of, are more countries forced to pay attention to this thing because they have no other option, or because somebody else is paying attention to it and they need to as well? What's your read on that?
Well, I would agree that they're going to all need it. And unfortunately, it seems like nation states like to learn through experience rather than through the like personal experience rather than experience of others. So it's almost like they need to be deplatformed or debanked or cut off from the SWIFT system before they realize that, well, yeah, it was not a good idea to have all our money in some other central bank somewhere else, right? Because all fiat currencies live in some central bank somewhere, right? It's not like you have physical cash in the billions and trillions that are shipped around on pallets. They're just sitting in central banks, and you, as central bank of the country of Walkerstan, have an IOU with the other central bank, right? So they will understand in time, but it's almost like there's no foresight, there's no planning, and it's reactionary. And I can see why that is the case because most countries are broke, right? They are in debt. So they don't really have funds to deploy to buy scarce assets. Like some do, but generally speaking, most countries are in debt. So it's a difficult sell to tell your population, we're going to go and buy some Bitcoin because you have people that question the validity of Bitcoin as a one objection. And the second is, well, why are you doing that instead of building roads, right? Like, why are you spending money? And I think this is why it was difficult for the US to really start the SBR and codify it and go into non-budget neutral acquisition. And they had this focus on this thing about budget neutral. We'll acquire, but it's not spending money because when everyone's poor and they're suffering from inflation, it's a very, very hard sell to say we're going to go and buy something, right? Even Canada, the government here is trying to create a sovereign wealth fund with no wealth. So it's more of a debt fund. They're borrowing from people to invest in projects. So it's a difficult thing. Like people just have to learn, governments have to learn, and it's the same all around that you want a neutral bearer asset that you can move yourself. And definitely people like Dalio saying it can't be moved because someone can block it does not help the case on any level.
Yeah, that is certainly true. And it is also true though that the Overton window is very much shifting around. Bitcoin is firmly in the Overton window now. You've got even Trump's upcoming Fed pick who has been actively talking about Bitcoin. And that kind of leads us into the next story that I want to talk about with you, because Trump's pick to lead the Federal Reserve just officially cleared a major hurdle in Washington. The U.S. Senate has now officially confirmed Kevin Warsh as a Federal Reserve governor, moving him one step closer to potentially becoming the next Federal Reserve chair. And markets are obviously paying attention because Warsh is not signaling business as usual. At his confirmation hearing in early April, Warsh argued that the Fed has lost credibility with both markets and the public, calling for what he described as a regime change inside the central bank.
I mean, one thing that's come up as I've been engaged with different experts is concern about rapid reduction. If you are moving in that speed, that it could generate a number of concerns, including upward pressure on long-term interest rates. So I guess I just wanted to check, do you share that concern? As you are thinking about how to reduce it, do you also understand, though, that there are concerns about rapid reduction and the speed with which you're trying to go down?
Yes, Senator, and that kind of regime change would have to be deliberate, well orchestrated, well choreographed, and well described so that unnecessary upset are not done to financial markets as we go to a policy regime change much more focused on interest rates.
The timing is notable. New reports released today show U.S. inflation rose 3.8% year over year in April, coming in above expectations and adding more pressure on the Fed as markets debate whether inflation is becoming structurally embedded again. Warsh has also stood out from most Fed contenders for his comments about Bitcoin and digital assets.
That digital assets should be incorporated into our financial industry so Americans have new investment opportunities and consumer protections.
Senator, digital assets are already part of the fabric of our financial services industry in the United States. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh.
Senator. In past interviews, he has argued Bitcoin can serve as a signal when monetary policy loses discipline, which seems to happen quite often, while also drawing a clear line against the Federal Reserve launching a central bank digital currency. I'd like to bring in Samson again to get your take on this. Samson, I mean, to me, this is pretty remarkable, really, just hearing Warsh's comments over the months and years here leading up to now this moment as he becomes a governor. Is this expected for you that, like, well, of course, finally, about time somebody came in at the Fed who at least understood Bitcoin, even the way when he talked about Bitcoin as enforcing discipline on the Fed from that older interview clip. We didn't show it on this one, but he talks about it enforcing discipline. He's almost saying it's acting like a canary in the coal mine for when your policy is bad. That is a really remarkable thing for somebody who is now going to become potentially the chair of the Federal Reserve to say. Are you bullish on this? Are you ambivalent on this? Where do you sit on this? Regardless, it seems like it's a pretty monumental shift to have somebody like this at the Fed.
I would say I sit on the bullish side of it. Yeah, Warsh is a mixed bag. Like, he said a lot of interesting things. He's obviously pro Bitcoin. He's also, I think, disclosed to have invested in some DeFi and crypto projects. So he's not a pure Bitcoin maximalist, but that's difficult to get. He's anti-CBDC, which is a check mark in the right column for sure. And he's kind of hawkish, right? He wants to keep rates high, and he doesn't believe in easy money and QE and all that. Whereas Bitcoin has historically thrived in that, easy money environment. So it's difficult to say exactly what will happen, but I think he's a favorable pick. I'll definitely miss Jay Powell, and I'm glad that he can focus just on Kraken now and not to do two things at once. But yeah, I would say these are interesting times to have a potential Fed chair that is pro Bitcoin, and it's not yet certain that high rates will be punitive for Bitcoin, because rates have been high for quite some time, and Bitcoin has been doing quite well. I mean, some people, the more bearish ones, are obviously going to say, we're down 25% or 30% or whatever. But I would say Bitcoin has fared incredibly well during these times of high rates, and if anything, it is serving as that indicator that hard assets are in demand, and it's driving capital to harder assets, as we've seen with metals and with Bitcoin, right? Not to the same extent as the metals, but I believe that is yet to come.
So it is interesting, and I'm glad you brought this up around there was this big narrative, I think, not necessarily even pushed by Bitcoiners, sometimes pushed by both Bitcoiners and Bitcoin detractors, that Bitcoin just only does well in easy money times, right? But if you look back, Bitcoin's almost entire run up from the depths of the 2022 bear up to 125K, the majority of that time was spent in a monetary constriction. Like, M2 went down during that time. Rates were raised at a historic pace, and Bitcoin performed exceptionally well. So it sort of seems to kind of invalidate that old critique that the only way Bitcoin can perform well is if they've got the printer on full blast. Is that fair to say? Is that kind of how you look at that period?
Yeah, I would say so. And there are other factors at play here too. So when rates are high, then stablecoin issuers like Tether are having record profits, and they're reinvesting those profits into the Bitcoin ecosystem, into Bitcoin technology, and buying Bitcoin outright. So, all roads really lead to Bitcoin. High, low, it's all good for Bitcoin at the end of the day. Even you could look at STRC from Strategy as another indicator too. Like, it's doing quite well, and it's at 11.5% now. Maybe it'll go higher, but like, if rates dropped, it would be better for them, right? Because then they'll be paying more. But even with rates high, they're still highly competitive, and it's an incredibly, incredibly successful product that is really the iPhone moment for a strategy.
So safe to say, and I'd love to stick on that maybe for a moment, because there's been a lot of, let's say, mixed feelings about this from various corners of the Bitcoin ecosystem. Safe to say then you view it as a very positive thing in terms of overall Bitcoin adoption, acceptance, let's say, but then also just from a number go up perspective. Like, this is just a feeder, flywheel, whatever you want to call it, driving more Bitcoin accumulation on the part of MS, or on the part of Strategy.
I would say so. Basically, it doesn't matter what happens. It doesn't matter who the Fed chair is. Number is going to go up because fiat is dying. So, you can change the person in the driver's seat, but the car is still driving towards that cliff.
Yeah, I think nothing stops this train, one might say, to quote Lynn Alden and Walter White. No, I think you're exactly right there, and it almost seems that the people there's been strange vibes of late. Let's say around Bitcoin, it feels like, and just from personal experience, also from people I've talked to, that the retail wave never really arrived this cycle, or there wasn't. If you still believe in cycles, but that's a different story. But or there wasn't this blow off euphoric top or anything like that. It was a little euphoric, but not too much. Where do you sit on that, and whether or not cycles in Bitcoin are actually meaningfully driven by the halving schedule at this point, or are more largely driven by, let's say, the business cycle, liquidity cycles, more macro type factors? What's your position on that?
So I've said it time and time again on podcasts. I don't really believe in cycles. Sometimes I'll slip and say cycle by accident, but that's just habit, right? But I don't believe the halving has an impact anymore. And it's questionable if it ever had an impact, because the business cycle and the election cycles also lined up with the 4-year marks, right? But definitely, if you're a cycle purist, then you should see that we didn't follow the cycle. We had a new all-time high before the halving, and we're down. But I think the most important thing is not money supply. It's not the business cycle. It's about what is really happening in the world. And what is really happening in the world now is we're seeing massive amounts of adoption. We're seeing nation states buying Bitcoin. We're seeing central banks acquiring Bitcoin, the Czech central bank. We have Strategy now, which is kind of a monster, and it's devouring Bitcoin at an unprecedented scale. I think they are probably on average multiple times the daily mine supply if you average it out. And then you have other treasury companies too, like Metaplanet, Strive, BSTR from Adam Back is coming soon. And I just don't see the market being able to sustain all this demand, not to mention the ETFs. And if you go back, my thesis for $1 million Bitcoin was the ETFs, that they unlock the floodgates of capital to enter, because it's sort of like a TradFi L2. There's no blocker for your brokerage to buy Bitcoin, right? They're aggregating demand, whereas historically every bull run was kind of muted either through, Coinbase going down, or it was because the exchanges were bottlenecked and they couldn't onboard people fast enough. But that's because it was a retail-driven market. But the market is just radically different now. And also the unit bias is radically different now too. People are buying Bitcoin at $40, 40 something dollars, or 60 something dollars, right? They're buying IBIT, they're buying FBTC. They don't know necessarily that Bitcoin is at 70, 80K or 100K or 126K. But you put all of that together, and it is just, you're on another planet now, and it's like a Bitcoin planet. And Saylor said it, I've said it too, but the treasury companies, they will buy at any price. So if you're not in a rush to sell, you don't need to sell at 80. You don't need to sell at 100. They'll buy from you at 200. They'll buy from you at 300. They'll buy from you at 1 million or 10 million. So you can't really net that out with business cycles and money supply and interest rates. It's just too radically different.
It is a really good point too, that we're kind of at this stage where, even though Bitcoin is, as well, not as large as it's ever been. It's obviously, the market cap is down from when Bitcoin was at its all-time highs. But Bitcoin is, very large now, almost a multi-trillion-dollar asset, has been a $2 trillion asset before. But it's still very small in terms of overall pools of capital that are out there. And I think perhaps a lot of people don't understand the scale of the game that is being played here. Like, you look at gold's run up and how many multiples of Bitcoin's market cap gold added in just a period of months, right? There, people think like, well, how much higher can Bitcoin possibly go? It's already this high, da da da. I mean, does that just represent kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of actually how much capital is out there sloshing around in these various buckets, looking for something to get into?
I would say so. And gold went up pretty quickly, silver too. And I think most important the most important takeaway from that is that Bitcoin can also have this massive run up. It can 5x, it can 10x. And because it is small, it can do that. Like even these massive asset classes, gold and silver, could have this run up. So Bitcoin can definitely have a run up exceeding their scale for sure. And then it's only a matter of time before Bitcoin is the most valuable asset class on the planet, overtaking gold. And I think once you reach a certain point, Bitcoin starts to demonetize gold because gold is still difficult to use as a store of value, to hold it. You have to have security. You have to build large facilities. You have to audit and make sure no one stole a gold bar or replaced it with a lead bar coated in gold. And if you ever want to move it, you need armed guards. And if you want to move it far, you need a convoy of ships to move it across an ocean. So it's inevitable that Bitcoin will just eat away at gold's market cap, even if Bitcoin did nothing. Just people understanding the difficulty of holding gold, it's going to overtake gold of just in and of itself by no other metric other than it's better gold. So there's no scenario which Bitcoin doesn't win. It just wins out at any time. It's just a matter of time.
You mentioned as well, just with the Czech central bank being kind of a bit of a forerunner here. They took, I think, $1 million Bitcoin position as part of sort of like a exploratory portfolio that they were doing, and they've spoken very positively about it. I think they had some representative at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas, if I'm not mistaken, giving a presentation on this, which is really fascinating. But obviously, central banks, gold has been their bread and butter, like their go-to for, well, many years, right? For a long time, it's been gold. Like that's what you fall back on. That's what you have as your reserve. Not that anything is backed by gold anymore, but they're still accumulating it. I'm curious if you think, from the nation state perspective, obviously there's the nation state, but in many cases that nation state is, is separate from the central bank. Separate, public, private, whatever you want to say. But
in theory,
yeah, but in theory. But let's just say, do you think that may be a trend that we see, where central banks actually, despite what Ray Dalio may believe, that they're never going to want Bitcoin, they're only going to want gold, that we actually see adoption happening at that top level from the central bank side as a reserve asset before the government moves on something, just because of various frictions or lack thereof that would be involved? I'd love your perspective on that.
It's difficult to say. I think for a central bank, it may be harder because a government can use a custodian, right? We know that the US government uses Coinbase Prime, but let's say, a central bank wants to hold Bitcoin. Would they use a custodian? I'm not sure. It's almost as if they must have their own infrastructure, their own cold storage system, and their own vaults, just like they would hold gold, right? So I think they're not prepared for that, really. And to do that at scale, at a level they're comfortable with, is very challenging because they need to understand not only Bitcoin, but the entire Bitcoin security apparatus around it and how to secure it safely, which is even harder. So we'll see what happens, but I think necessity is the mother of Bitcoin adoption. So when some central bank figures it out, the other ones will find themselves scrambling to figure it out. And I can predict already that some of them are going to get hacked and lose their keys, or something bad will happen to them. If it's inevitable almost.
Do you guys do any kind of liaising with central banks in the work that you guys do with Jan 3, or do you focus more on lawmakers, policymakers, kind of political side leaders?
Yeah, so we've met with a number of central banks. We've been to the Central Bank of Guatemala. We have had a call with another central bank that I don't want to name because we haven't publicly said it. We've went to the Bank of Japan. Yeah, a number of them. And it's more so to educate them about Bitcoin, but I don't think we're at the stage yet where we're actually helping them plan a strategy to accumulate Bitcoin.
No, that's fair. In that experience, what was your general analysis of, let's say, their reception of Bitcoin? Is it just kind of indifferent? Is it hostile? Is something in between? What do you see when you have these conversations?
I would say it's kind of indifferent and curious, but at the same time, they're not either they're not aware or they're not willing to admit some problems are happening. So one central bank we had a call with, they're having serious monetary issues in the country, and we kind of said Bitcoin can help you with that, and they replied, everything's fine here. So how do you help someone that doesn't understand that they need help? That's the biggest question, I think, for all of this. But the most interesting thing I found was that some of the central banks, there are people there that have a good understanding of Bitcoin, but they're not able to influence policy or decision making. And it's almost like a self-imposed inertia. They say, well, it's too hard for us to do anything with Bitcoin. So they don't do something with Bitcoin. But there are people there that know. And it's sort of like a mirror for, I don't know, a company or something. You might have a person in the company that's some mid-level manager or director, and they know about Bitcoin, they know the benefits, but then when you put them in a room with the other management, they can't seem to do anything. Like they can't move it forward.
Do you think that's just like almost a career risk perception thing? Like you don't want to be the guy bringing up the magic internet money at the meeting?
Yeah, there's no benefit, right? Like, why would you stick your neck out and say we're going to implement a Bitcoin strategy for the central bank or a company even? You're putting your own job at risk by taking that stance. If Bitcoin goes down, people are going to blame you, and if it goes up, you don't really get any thanks for it either. It's more like, oh yeah, it's my idea, I did it.
So I've got a question for you that's a little bit of a little bit of a tangent here, but just back to kind of the let's say banking system more broadly as it relates to stablecoins. We've seen the Clarity Act now is going into its markup period. One of the big, the only thing that kind of Bitcoiners care about in there, at least for myself, is the developer protections in the BRCA portion of that, trying to keep open source freedom tech devs out of federal prison. That'd be ideal if you want to be the Bitcoin and crypto capital of the world, one would think. But the part that's been really getting the most attention, I believe, is the stablecoin yield part. And I'm curious, like zooming out from that a little bit, not getting into the details of the bill per se, but do you think that this debate between kind of, let's say, big crypto, the Coinbases of the world and the banking industry about stablecoin yield, and the banks being a little bit, perhaps justly so, terrified of stablecoins eating their lunch because they're actually offering interest to their customers, like crazy idea, actually doing what a bank's supposed to do. Do you think that provides a little bit of, let's say, cover for Bitcoin? Kind of a little bit of Bitcoin's not the boogeyman or the enemy, the hostile actor anymore. Bitcoin's this other thing. It's not producing yield. It's just, boring old Bitcoin over there with its fixed supply and, immutability. But stable coins, those are the ones the bankers are scared about. It's just kind of, I'm curious of your perspective on that. Does that kind of fight over stable coins actually provide some perhaps much needed cover for Bitcoin as Bitcoin also gets more entrenched in the existing financial system through ETFs, through corporate holdings, et cetera?
I guess you could argue that it does provide some sort of a cover. Bitcoin doesn't compete with them on their core business that much. Rather, stablecoins do. But I would say both Bitcoin and stablecoins sort of disintermediate banks. So they should, in theory, worry about both. But if they're focused on stablecoins, then it's fine. But yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I haven't followed the Clarity Act that closely. I know that there's some battle, mainly Coinbase and the banks. Coinbase wants to provide yield, but I'm really not sure like if it matters that much at the end of the day, because if you look at other stable coins like Tether, it's the biggest stable coin in the world, the most popular, most used. They don't have yield and it works fine. And you can actually, lend out your dollars and generate yield too. So there is technically yield on stable coins. It's just I think Coinbase wants to offer it directly and compete sort of directly with the banks in that deposit and yield generation model.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And speaking of sort of big crypto more broadly, I'm curious if you've observed the trend amidst all like the big kind of crypto casino type companies, and Coinbase, Gemini, let's say Robinhood as well. They're basically kind of almost all indistinguishable in terms of their offerings. Maybe Robinhood has a few more stocks now, but they all made the pivot to prediction markets as well around the same time and started sort of hyping that up. Do you think, is that an indication or like an implicit admission by some of these larger crypto companies that perhaps the day of infinite shit coins being launched on their platforms, dumped on retail, is over? Like kind of the jig is up a little bit? Or is that just them trying to add another revenue stream in there and they're still going to keep the crypto thing going as long as they possibly can, as long as it's still making them money?
I don't know. I think they just lack vision and they lack a low time preference. They're just looking for anything they can do. And to me, it just screams like we don't know what we're doing. We're going to follow every trend. And Coinbase is probably the worst for this. They just pick whatever is popular and trending and jump on it and then do it badly and then jump on the next trend. And that just doesn't really do anything interesting. I said it in some interview before, but I think Brian Armstrong was just lucky. Like Bitcoin went up and it saved his business because he was not focused on Bitcoin at all. And now he's the biggest custodian, custodying funds for most of the exchanges. And he hated Bitcoin for the longest time. He'll never admit it, but if you go and read what he's talking about, what he's promoting, he was all about Ethereum and crypto and alts because he got butthurt in the block size war. But yeah, like it's just he's just lucky that Bitcoin exists to save him, and he has no vision for what's happening. I don't know if any other platforms have any vision of what's happening too, but they're just looking for the latest thing. And even if you look at some of the ETFs, they're doing the same thing. They're launching altcoin ETFs, and they're not focused. And I think in 50 to 100 years, it'll be the ones that focused on Bitcoin and built up robust services around Bitcoin and have exemplary security practices that are going to be the winners.
Yeah, it is kind of, it seems like quite a fumble, apparently fumbling into good fortune with Coinbase, because they have a shockingly, I mean, they've got a good amount of Bitcoin that they hold in their treasury, but not as much as you would think for as long as they've been around. And you look at that in comparison to what Strategy has done in such a short period of time. And I think I'm curious if you think there's I think there's a growing realization from some of the crypto side of things that perhaps, the best answer was to do what Sailor is doing and you hold Bitcoin, you build products on top of that, financialized products. You stop just trying to, create your own fiat tokens ad nauseum. Like, is there a realization there, or is it just going to be kind of denial until the bitter end?
Probably denial till the bitter end, chasing trends till the bitter end. I mean, if Coinbase was just all in on Bitcoin and they just bought Bitcoin, they could have easily been Strategy today. And a lot of people forget that, but it's all out there in public blog posts, records, and everything. You can see the long, meandering crypto altcoin path that Coinbase took, and every single initiative they took that kind of went nowhere when they could have just been all in on Bitcoin. And that's a massive opportunity cost there.
It really is. And boy, we'll see. Maybe they wise up. Maybe they don't. But Samson, we are running up towards the end of our time here. I want to make sure I give you a chance if there's anything else too that you guys are working on at Jan 3. Obviously, you've got the nation state side of things. You're doing a ton with Aqua Wallet. Super excited about this agentic Aqua as well. And again, I just have to say, I love the wallet. I use it all the time. Just used it to buy some Steak and Shake in Bitcoin. It's a great wallet. People should go check it out. But anything else you guys work on, either amidst that, or do you guys have even more things that you want to share with folks? You guys keep very busy. I'll say that.
I think I can't tell too much until we get it across the line, but we have two big things this year that are going out, and I think they'll be very interesting for Bitcoiners for sure. And we have a new version of Aqua coming in probably a month. We've been migrating from Flutter to React so that we can improve our dev time and speed of getting features to market. So that's a big change. And I think before we release that new version, we're going to have Lightning addresses. So you'll be able to get walker@aqua.net and use that.
I love it. And on the agentic Aqua, is that something that I didn't quite hear earlier, is that live now for people to start utilizing, or is that something it's currently in the works, or it's already launched?
It's already launched, so you could just get your OpenClaw and tell it install agentic Aqua, and it'll make a wallet for you, and you can start transacting.
That is really cool. Are you guys seeing some good tinkering happening with that already?
I think we need to add more features. We went out with just Bitcoin, Liquid, and Lightning, and I think once we have swaps, stablecoin, cross-chain, and more features, then it'll really take off.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I've still have not set up an open claw. I've been reluctant to do so until I can figure out how to best safeguard my own systems around it, because I am not a shadowy supercoder and don't want to screw something up too badly. Where do you want to send people, Samson? You're Excellion on X and most other places, but anywhere else, where can people go to go check out Aqua, to check out what you're doing with Jan 3? If there's any central bankers or policymakers listening to this who want to drink from the fountain of your wisdom, where can they find out more about you guys?
So I guess our website's a good resource, jan3.com, and on X we're at jan3com. If you're interested in AI things, so you can follow A1 Laboratory on X. That's our division that does all our AI stuff and tinkering and R&D. So we'll publish info about Agentic Aqua there. But yeah, also a1lab.com. So A1 comes from I think your one of your education ministers, not ministers, like the Secretary of Education in the US. She said A1 instead of AI originally on some panel discussion.
Oh boy, the best and the brightest, right? Yeah, it's like Ilhan Omar saying World War XI. I was just like, oh boy, these people are making laws, huh? That's disconcerting.
That's why we have Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for you, Samson, for sharing your time. I know you are a very busy guy. Are you currently jet setting around, or do you have a little bit of time to breathe for once?
I've actually canceled most of my conferences or tell people I'm skipping this year. I'll do Lugano, so I'll see you in the city of Lugano in October. But aside from that, I'm trying my best not to travel for the next, several months. There's just too much to do, and there's too much to do with AI right now.
Yeah. Well, so even when you're at home, you manage to stay extremely busy. But really, Samson, thanks so much for sharing your time. Pleasure as always talking to you. People should go check out Aqua. It's a great wallet. I love using it. You guys are building awesome stuff over there. So keep up the great work, and thanks for sharing your time with us here on Roxom.
Thanks, Walker. Great to be on Roxom.
All right, guys. And thank you all who tuned in today during our show. It was a great one. Always good to hear from Samson. I love what those guys are building. Seriously, go check out Aqua Wallet if you have not. It's one of my favorite wallets to use as just a daily driver. And you should go out there and find ways to spend Bitcoin. More and more ways every day. Spend it whenever you get a chance, or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care, but it sure is a lot of fun. So thank you guys. Again, I'm Walker America. I'm here every Tuesday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on RoxomTV. I'm also here on Thursdays and Fridays with Hank at Roxom for our dual hosting sessions. So make sure to tune in and check those. Check out all the other great programming here on Roxom. Thank you guys so much for sharing your scarce time. I will see you guys next week. Take care.
This is Alex. Alex spends most of his time thinking like a trader, still deciding what to do with his Bitcoin. While Alex waits for the perfect entry, this is Laura. She's watching the S&P drop. Everyone is suddenly a macro expert. She doesn't panic. This is Tom. No screens, no noise, no stress. While Tom focuses on his swing, his Bitcoin focuses on compounding. Because Bitcoiners don't want more dollars. They want more Bitcoin.
I want more Bitcoin.
The best move is letting your Bitcoin work while you plan the next one. Grow by Roxom. One currency, one place.
Oh, I forgot to mention, dividends on Roxom are paid in Bitcoin. Stretch your income, 11.5% paid in Bitcoin.
Stretch your income to 11.5, get 11.5 in Bitcoin and Roxom. 11.5%. 11.